The wind whispers through the canyons of downtown Chicago, carrying with it the echoes of a city forever changed. It was the fall of 1982. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and promise. The Midwest was the heart of America, and Chicago was its booming, confident pulse. In the quiet, tree-lined suburbs that fanned out from the city's core, Arlington Heights, Elk Grove Village, Winfield, life was a portrait of post-war tranquility. Families gathered around television sets, children played in backyards until the streetlights flickered on, and a sense of security was as common as the brick and siding on the homes. It was a security that was, though no one knew it, already a ghost. It begins not with a bang but with a sigh, a slight pressure behind the eyes, a dull throb at the temples, the common, unremarkable ache of being human. And for that, there was a simple, trusted solution. In medicine cabinets across the nation, the bright red and white bottle of Tylenol was a beacon of modern reassurance. It was the product doctors recommended. It was the one parents reached for without a second thought. It was safety sealed in plastic and cotton. On the morning of September 29th, a Wednesday, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman of Elk Grove Village told her parents she had a cold. She was a bright, lively girl, with her whole life ahead of her. Her father, in an act of pure routine care, gave her a single extra-strength Tylenol capsule. It was the most natural thing in the world. Within hours she was found on her bathroom floor, unconscious, her body racked and failing. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought a desperate, losing battle against an enemy they could not see, could not name. She was pronounced dead. A family's world shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. A few miles away, in the neighboring suburb of Arlington Heights, a young postal worker named Adam Janis felt the onset of a headache. He was 27, strong, in the prime of his life. He took 2 capsules from a bottle he had purchased at a nearby supermarket. He collapsed in his home, his system in catastrophic failure. His death was as sudden as it was inexplicable. A shockwave of grief radiated through his family. That evening, gripped by a tragedy they could not comprehend, his brother Stanley and his brother's wife Teresa gathered at Adam's house to arrange the funeral. The world had gone dark, and their heads were pounding with stress and sorrow. Seeing a bottle of Tylenol on the counter, they each took a capsule, seeking a moment's relief from the unbearable. It was a decision that seemed insignificant. It was a decision that was fatal. Stanley died that night. Teresa died 2 days later. A single family devastated not once but 3 times over by the same small bottle. The threads of these separate tragedies began to twist together in the offices of the Cook County Medical Examiner. Dr. Thomas Kim, a deputy medical examiner, was performing the autopsy on Adam Janis. The signs were bizarre, pointing to a massive, systemic collapse. And then, a phone call. A sharp-eyed paramedic named Philip Capitelli, a man who had seen more than his share of human suffering, had responded to both Mary Kellerman's and Adam Janis's calls. A coincidence, perhaps, but the gnawing feeling in his gut told him it was not. He mentioned it to a colleague, who mentioned it to a nurse. The whisper traveled through the corridors of the hospital, a ghost of a suspicion. It was a dedicated nurse at Northwest Community Hospital, Helen Jansen, who finally gave the ghost a name. Reviewing the Janis family files, her eyes locked on a common denominator, a simple, everyday item noted in all their histories: Tylenol. Her heart sank. She immediately called the Cook County Medical Examiner's office. The pieces, horrifying and impossible, clicked into place. The news did not break. It detonated. Warnings flashed across television screens, interrupting soap operas and game shows. Radio broadcasts were cut short. Police cruisers, their lights flashing in silent urgency, prowled the suburbs, their loudspeakers blaring a warning that felt like it was from a science fiction nightmare. Do not use Tylenol. Repeat, do not use any Tylenol product. Panic, cold and absolute began to spread. It was a contagion of fear, and there was no vaccine. Inside grocery stores and pharmacies, the scene was surreal. Shoppers watched, their faces pale with dread, as police and health officials in grim, determined teams swept through the aisles. They wore gloves. They carried large black plastic trash bags. With methodical efficiency, they cleared entire shelves, the cheerful red and white of the Tylenol boxes disappearing into the void of the bags. The sound of the bottles rattling into the plastic was a death knell for an era of innocence. In millions of homes, people opened their medicine cabinets and stared at the familiar bottle. It was no longer a symbol of relief. It was a potential container of death, an object of pure terror. The autopsies removed all doubt. The killer was cyanide, a fine, crystalline powder, lethal in amounts smaller than a single grain of rice. A poison with a distinct bitter almond scent, though few lived to smell it. The analysis was chillingly precise. Someone had meticulously opened these capsules, the extra-strength Tylenol capsules, with their two-toned bodies, emptied them of their benign, powdery contents, and filled them with this instrument of pure annihilation. They had then carefully placed them back on the shelves of 6 different stores in different suburbs. This was not an accident. This was not a disgruntled employee at the factory. This was a deliberate, calculated act of mass murder, a random, anonymous sentence of death, passed on complete strangers. The investigation became a maelstrom, drawing in local police, the FBI, and the Food and Drug Administration. The profile of the unseen individual they hunted was a sketch of a ghost. This was a person with a steady hand, a patient mind, someone who could work meticulously with tiny capsules, who could move through the mundane world of supermarkets without attracting a second glance, all while carrying a weapon of unimaginable destruction in their pocket. Their motive was a void. There was no ransom note, no political statement, no grievance aired. Just the act itself, the introduction of random, senseless death into the most routine of human ritual. The psychological portrait was of a person who sought not money, not fame, but a profound and terrible power, the power to hold an entire city, an entire nation, in the palm of their hand, frozen in fear. As the days bled into weeks, the fear began to mutate, to replicate itself. Copycat poisonings emerged in other states. A bottle of Tylenol laced with strychnine in California, cyanide found in other over-the-counter medications. The nation was holding its breath, looking at its own medicine cabinet with a side-eyed glance of suspicion. But in Chicago, the hunt was a grinding, monumental effort. Agents traced lot numbers, store inventories, delivery routes. They discovered the horrifying truth. The poisoned bottles came from different manufacturing plants, had been shipped at different times. The perpetrator had not poisoned the product at its source. They had gone on a campaign, visiting multiple stores after the bottles were on the shelves, and planted their poison. This was a new kind of crime, a campaign of retail terrorism. And then, a crack in the wall of silence. A letter postmarked from New York arrived at the headquarters of Johnson & Johnson. The author claimed to be the Tylenol killer. The handwriting was neat, the tone arrogant, taunting. The demand was for $1 million, a massive sum. Instructions were given for a wire transfer to a bank account in Switzerland. It was a thread finally. The FBI, with a mixture of hope and grim determination, set an elaborate trap. They set up a clandestine meeting in a New York hotel, agents posing as corporate executives, the room wired for sound and video. They waited. A man walked in, but he was not a master criminal. He was James Lewis, a disgruntled accountant with a history of writing threatening letters. He had seen the chaos on the news and saw a vile opportunity. He was convicted of extortion and spent over a decade in prison, but he was never charged with the murders. The investigation into the actual poisonings, the ones that took 7 lives, slammed into another dead end. The ghost had vanished. The legacy of those 7 days in September is a world we now inhabit, a world we built from the ashes of that shattered trust. The tragedy forced a revolution. Almost overnight, the tamper-evident seal was born. The shrink-wrapped bottle, the impossible-to-open plastic clamshell, the foil blister pack. These are not mere conveniences. They are monuments. They are the physical manifestations of a collective trauma, a permanent scar on the psyche of consumer America. Johnson & Johnson's legendary recall of 31 million bottles, their stark transparency in the face of catastrophe, became a benchmark for corporate responsibility. But it was a strategy forged in the fires of absolute necessity. And so, The file remains open, a cold case in a filing cabinet, its contents a testament to an enduring mystery. No one has ever been held accountable for the deaths of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janis, Stanley Janis, Teresa Janis, Mary McFarland, Paula Prince, and Mary Reiner. Over the years, suspects emerged, their names flashing in the headlines before fading back into obscurity. A troubled, brilliant loner named Ted Kaczynski was investigated and cleared. A bitter man named Roger Arnold was hounded by suspicion until it consumed him. Leads were pursued, DNA was analyzed, but nothing ever stuck. The ghost has a dozen names, 100 faces in 100 theories, but no definitive identity. The Tylenol murders were a fundamental rupture in the American narrative. They taught a generation that the world could be malevolent in a way we had never before conceived, that the most profound dangers were not in the dark alleyways, but in the brightly lit, sterile aisles of our neighborhood store, not in the hand of a stranger we were taught to avoid, but in a package we ourselves, with our own trust, brought across our thresholds and into the sanctity of our homes. It was a crime that offered no reason, no satisfying resolution, no face to put to the monster. It leaves only a permanent, unsettling question mark hanging in the air, and a lingering, unshakable feeling, a lesson carved into the national soul, that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not those that end, but those that simply leaving behind only the whisper of the wind, the echo of a warning, and the memory of a trust forever broken.